behalf of Discover Dixon, thank you for coming to Founders Day 2026. We're sure in for a treat today, and we're just happy that you could join us early morning. So today, Founders Day is the day we remember the rich history of Dixon, which was founded 196 years ago today, on April 11th, 1830. In recent years, our speaker has become well known as an expert in the rich history of Dixon. After graduating from Dixon High School, he earned a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degrees, and a PhD. Before retiring in 2019, he had successful careers in ministry, broadcasting, and corporate communications. As a voice talent, his recorded voice has been used professionally in all 50 states and internationally on more than 15,000 radio and TV commercials and more than 3,000 corporate videos. In 2022, he also became a YouTuber. His YouTube videos about his research into early Christian assemblies have attracted more than 1.2 million views and about 20,000 subscribers. In retirement, he has been a local history columnist for the Dixon Telegraph and Sterling Gazette, and he has been highly sought after as a speaker. In his recent book, Distinctive Dixon, which we do have for sale in the back for $35, tells about the fascinating stories of Dixon's rich history, was published only 4 months ago, but is already in its 3rd printing. Let's please give a warm welcome to our speaker, Tom Wadsworth.
Well, good morning. Hang in here. Slight technical correction to make. Isn't this a cool place, the Loveland building? Man, there's history throughout this place. We'll actually be referring to it a few times in the presentation, as you will soon find out. You know, I've always known that there was this connection between Dixon and Walgreen for a long time. We all know Walgreen Field, the Walgreen estate. But what exactly is that connection? And that sent me on a search to find out all the ways that Charles R. Walgreen connects with Dixon. When I started this research about 2 years ago, I contacted Walgreen's corporate offices in Chicago, expecting to get shut down immediately and threatened with a lawsuit. I'm not kidding, because I've had experience in dealing with, you know, these big, huge corporations and trying to get information from them. But no, the people in the PR department there love Dixon. They've been here. They think this is cool. And they just opened up their files and gave me photos and images and information that I had never would have imagined. So that's the source of a lot of the stuff you're about to see here today. So let's talk about Charles R. Walgreen and his relationship with Dixon. Just a minute, I'm getting another glitch here. Hold on, I can fix this. Okay, it's Myrtle Walgreen, his wife, in her autobiography, who said, Charles liked Dixon. He always liked Dixon. That's a quote from his wife. She knew that he loved this place and always loved this place. She said that when he was a kid in Dixon, he could play baseball and swim in the summer, hunt in the autumn through the woods that he was later to own, and in the winter skate on the frozen Rock River. He remembers growing up here in his teenage years and had favorite memories of growing up here, like so many of you and I, of playing baseball and swimming and all the stuff, the woods that are around here. But he was not born in Dixon. He actually was born near Galesburg, Illinois. This is a place, this is a map. You see Dixon in the upper right-hand corner. Galesburg is down there. The Walgreen farm is just a little bit north of there. And notice Bishop Hill, which is really close to there. How many of you have been to Bishop Hill? Yeah, wow, a lot of hands went up there. Bishop Hill was a Swedish commune developed around 1846. The Walgreens came from Sweden, and I think they landed there at the Walgreen around about 1852, shortly thereafter. I cannot find a direct connection between Bishop Hill Commune and the Walgreens, but there had to be some kind of connection. The time was almost the same when they came. They're so close to each other. They both came from the same country. They both landed on this spot in Illinois. It's absolutely amazing. But that's where Charles grew up, on a farm just north of Galesburg. Myrtle goes on to say that the Walgreen children were expected to work hard, but they also had plenty of time for their studies. And all of them were ambitious, all of them. But as they were working on the farm and growing up down there, the oldest brother, Edwin, decided to move to Dixon in the 1880s. And the reason that he came to Dixon in the 1880s was because of a college that was here. It was known as the Northern Illinois Normal School in Dixon. Yeah, that's an actual photo of the college that stood in Dixon. And what street did it stand on? College Avenue. College Avenue. I don't know if anybody said that, but it's College Avenue. Here's a map from 1894. By the way, you can buy the copy of this map at the Lee County Historical Society. I bought one, some big one like this. It's in such excellent detail. Really, really cool. The college was down here on the left. This is the south side. This is the river. There's the north side. College is over there on College Avenue. And if you look closer there, you can see that that's College Avenue right next to it, really close to the river. It goes from 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Street here, and the college was stretched along there. But that's what Edwin Walgreen went to in the 1880s. And he liked it so much, and he wrote back to his dad, he said, "Dad, Dixon is really the place to be." And so his father packed up everything, and brought the child Charles Walgreen, the little brother to Edwin, and they moved to Dixon in the year 1887. And as Myrtle Walgreen said, that they moved here because of the good schools in Dixon. How about that? Yes, how about that? The school district. Yes, the school district has changed a little since 1887, thank God. But you know, that's the old time back then. But they had all these colleges here back then, not just one, but a number of them. So the Walgreens packed up everything from their farm down there near Galesburg, and they began to trek back to Dixon in 1887. This is that same map of Dixon again. The Walgreen home was at 301 South Galena Avenue, just a block down from the Nachusa House. Dixon High School at that time was South Central School, just about 2 blocks away from there, where Charles Walgreen went to Dixon schools. The Methodist Church, they were also members there. The mother, Ellen Walgreen, was very active with the Methodist Church. That's only a couple blocks away from there, and college is only about 8 blocks down the road from where Charles is growing up. So in 1889, Charles is 16 years old, and like his brother, he goes to college. He went to the Northern Illinois Normal School and the Dixon Business College. He actually went to the Dixon Business College, which was in the same building. This is this cool. These are those 3 buildings I showed you a little bit ago. It was built in 1882. 1st Street to be down here, 2nd Street come in the middle, and 3rd Street to be out there. But that's where Charles entered college at age 16 in 1889. He went there for about a year and got some good business education at that time, but he soon got tired of there and went to work at the I.B. Countryman General Store, and then later got a job at the shoe factory. Some of you remember the Freeman Shoe Factory in Dixon, right? You remember that? Well, there's a bunch of shoe factories that were in that same location over the years, and he went to the one there in 1891, and it was called, according to the Telegraph, one of the largest shoe factories in the world. That's what they said. They also said that 10% of the Dixon population worked at the shoe factory. And Charles Walgreen joined them there at that factory. Now, again, you note this shoe factory is right next to the college. This is, again, that's aerial view. The college was there. Shoe factory is right between the college and the river, right along the river. And in 1891, while Charles is working there in his first year, he has a finger accident. Yeah, a nasty one. Which he got his finger caught in some machine, lopped off the top joint of the third finger on his left hand. Of course, there's no photos of that exist today. But I got kind of curious. I went to ChatGPT. How many of you know what ChatGPT is? Okay, it's an AI program. It's for free. And I said, create an image of 18-year-old Charles Walgreen working in a shoe factory in Dixon, Illinois in 1891, getting his finger caught in a machine and having the top third of his third finger lopped off by the machine. And this is what it created for me in about 30 seconds. Ooh! There's a finger, isn't it? Really grotesque. They missed, I think, at the fourth finger lopped off. But anyway, you get the same idea. But I thought this is pretty cool. He's wearing a garb about typical of that time and era. He's working in a factory where there's absolutely no safety precautions on these machines where anything could happen. Well, he got his finger lopped off. And he had to go to the doctor to get it fixed. He went to Dr. Law, who had an office on 1st Street in Dixon, and he bandaged him up. There was no, he didn't put it back on or anything. He lost that finger, that part of the finger for the rest of his life. But Law said to him, listen, now you are not to do anything strenuous. But the very next day, Charles Walgreen was out playing baseball, and Dr. Law caught him and said, listen, Charles, stop this. You can't be doing this. He said, listen, right below my office on 1st Street in Dixon, there's Dave Horton's got a drugstore, and he's looking for a clerk. And if you'd like, I can put in a good word for you to work there as a clerk at the pharmacy. And Charles thought about that. He was fascinated with all the medicines in Dr. Law's office. And first he rejected the idea, but later on he decided, okay, I'm going to do it. And Charles Walgreen got his very first job in the drugstore industry in Dixon, Illinois, at Horton's drugstore on West 1st Street. This building is no longer stands. No longer stands. You might wonder where this is. Well, it's actually where, this is Salamandra's, right here. Cora, are you here today? Cora? There you are. Hi, Cora. We're going to get to you in a minute. But this is where the Horton's drugstore was, right next door to it. And that is where Charles R. Walgreen learned the pharmacy business. No place else in the world, right here in Dixon, Illinois. And then the story goes, Charles told this story many times. He's working there. Remember, he's in 1892. He is 19 years old. And he's finished college, he's finished high school. And this is in November of 1892. It had just snowed outside on 1st Street. And they had a wood sidewalk out front that had a bunch of snow on it. And old man Horton said to Charles, I'm going to lunch. We need that shoveled off, all that snow shoveled off before I get back. Yeah, I'll get it done. Well, he got distracted by talking to his friends during the lunch hour. And then an hour went by, and finally Dave Horton comes back. And Charles realizes when old man Horton came in, he had that look of fire in his eye. Charles said, I quit! Horton said, too late, you're fired! That's the way the story has been told through the years. And oddly enough, I found in the Dixon Evening Telegraph on November the 26th of 1892 a reference to this whole story. Charles Walgreen today resigned his position at Horton's drugstore to go to school. Actually, I've never heard anything about him going to school. I think it was maybe just an excuse he made up to make it look good. But there it is in the Telegraph in November 26th of 1892. Well, he's fired now. He's already done with school. He has no job. He's got to make some money. He's pushing 20 years old. So he borrows $20 from his sister Clementine Walgreen. He gets on the train and decides to move to Chicago, Illinois, and seek his fortune there. And he goes out to the train station in Dixon. How do you remember the train station? Some of you remember that, right? There's a lot of old people in this audience. So he went out to the train station, got on the train going to Chicago, and while he's on the train, he picks up a paper from Chicago, because the train would go back and forth, so there's a Chicago newspaper there. And he starts looking through the want ads. And in the want ads, he sees a want ad for a drugstore clerk at a drugstore that's fairly close to where the train station was. So as soon as he gets off the train in Chicago, he walks a short distance to Rosenfeld's drugstore, and they hire him on the spot. He's supposed to start on the next Monday morning, working for $5 a week, which is better than he was getting at Horton's, which is $4 a week. So like a 20% increase in his salary, just like that. So he's very fortunate to get that. So for the next 5 years, he's working in Chicago. He actually bounces from one drugstore job to another, experiencing different kinds of owners. And finally, in 1897, he's 24 years old. He decides to get serious about this pharmacy business, and he becomes a registered pharmacist. Even back then, in the 1890s, they had a way to become a registered pharmacist and take a test and all that. So he got his RPH in 97. But in 1898, the very next year, in April, something happens that alerts everybody in America. I wouldn't have known what that was, but it was the Spanish-American War broke up. You remember the saying, "Remember the Maine"? Or the Maine was a ship that was sunk in a harbor in Cuba, presumably by the Spanish government, because there was tensions going on between the U.S. and Spain at that time. And everybody got upset about the sinking of the Maine, and people started signing up to go off to war, like Teddy Roosevelt did that. You remember this? But Charles, this guy is, as Myrtle said, Charles was intensely patriotic, convinced that a man should contribute to his country's well-being in every way that he could. This is the man, Charles R. Walgreen. And so when he hears that America has been attacked, he signs up. And he then joins the Army. Even though he just got his RPH a year earlier, he joins the Army, and he heads off to Camp Tanner in Springfield, Illinois. I found this photo, by the way, hanging on the walls at the Northwest Territory Historic Center here in Dixon, and I'd never seen this before. And there he is over here on the right. That's a photo of Charles R. Walgreen in the Army, in his Army uniform in 1898, before he headed off to Cuba to fight the Spaniards in the Spanish-American War. You've heard of Teddy Roosevelt charging up San Juan Hill. Have you heard this, right? Yeah. Right, but this was only about 8 miles away from where Charles was stationed at the Siboney Hospital. They put Charles to work doing a number of things that were related to his industry. He was filling prescriptions. He was dispensing medicines there in the hospital at Siboney, only about 8 miles from where Teddy Roosevelt fought on San Juan Hill. But the combat of the Spanish-American War lasted only 3 weeks, and it's all over. That's the way a war ought to go, right? It ought to be nice and quick and easy. And it was in this case. However, the primary causes of death down there in this tropical area was yellow fever, malaria, and dysentery. Ew. And so the Siboney Hospital was filled with a lot of guys having problems with disease rather than bullets. Charles wrote home from Cuba, and his letter was published in the Dixon Telegraph, and I found that thing. He wrote home to his parents, who were well known in Dixon at the time. This is August 4th of 1898. He says, "I'm writing to let you know I'm in splendid health, never better, and I believe I'm actually getting fat. But there is some sickness among our soldiers, some yellow fever, they say, but in a mild form." I don't know if Charles was minimizing the problem or he was writing this before it got really bad, but it did get really bad, and Charles contracted yellow fever, which was killing a number of the other soldiers. And he's there in the hospital where he's working, and he's now on a hospital bed being tended to, sweating profusely with the yellow fever, and he is actually declared dead. The doctors declared him dead. But all of a sudden, he comes back to life and scared all the doctors around him. So I wondered what that image would have looked like. So I went to ChatGPT. There he is waking up having been dead, and all the doctors are alarmed that this guy just came back to life. Now, Myrtle Walgreen, in her biography about Charles, said that after that experience, Charles knew that immortality was not just a theory and that the soul was not bound to the life of the body, because he saw himself floating above his dead body and looking down on it while he was dead. And he remembered all this. So this, I don't know what that does to somebody, but this definitely had an effect on Charles R. Walgreen. He is sent back to Chicago in 1899. His recovery takes months. He is one sick puppy up there. And he wants to get back to the drugstore business, and he finally is able to get back to it. And he gets a new drugstore job working at Isaac Blood's drugstore at Cottage Grove and Bowen Avenue on the south side of Chicago, and he renews his commitment to pharmacy. This store, this famous Cottage Grove and Bowen Avenue store, is on the south side of Chicago, off to the side of where you see this map. That's 1899. Charles now is 26 years old. And 2 years later, he's had enough experience of working for other people. He's going to start his own drugstore in 1901, the very first Walgreen drugstore in the world. And it's found in Chicago. But he's really prepared for this. He's 28 years old now. He's had 10 years of experience in the drugstore business. He's become an expert at profitability. He has worked for guys who are terrible at profitability and guys who are very good at it. And Charles is very shrewd, picking up all these tips on how to run a successful business. But he doesn't have enough money to buy Isaac Blood's drugstore, so he goes back home and borrows $2,000 from Dad, his father, Charles Walgreen, who lived in Dixon still at that time. $2,000 in 1901 is a chunk of dough. It's not six figures, but it's five figures for sure. And so then, having borrowed the money, he buys his first store, and it's called the Blood Walgreen store. It is the first drugstore in the world that has a Walgreen sign on it. Here's a photo of that that very same store in downtown Chicago. It's the Blood Walgreen store. If you look right above the sign, up there at the top, it says C.R. Walgreen, RPH in the store. So that's, by the way, I don't think that's Charles. I'm pretty sure that's not. Must have been some of his loyal workers. But that's the story of how Charles started his first drugstore. Now, some of you may have heard that he had his first drugstore here in Dixon. No, he didn't buy his first. He didn't own one here, but his first drugstore experience in that industry was here in Dixon. The first store was in Chicago. But now let's shift topic for a second and go to the story of Charles and Myrtle. Because Myrtle Walgreen has much more of a history with Dixon than Charles does. I'll explain that in a minute. But she's quite famous in local circles if you knew Myrtle Walgreen. But this is how they met. In 1901, Charles is working at his drugstore, the Blood Walgreen store, on Bowen Avenue. About 3 blocks down is this young lady named Myrtle Norton. Her brother is also in the drugstore business, and he knows Charles. And through her brother, they get to know one another. And finally, in 1901, in August, they both have an opportunity to join a whole bunch of other young folks going up on a camping trip into Wisconsin for 2 weeks. And they both decide to go. They really haven't dated much at all at that point. But up there in the woods in Wisconsin on this camping trip, they get to know each other quite well. And they're meeting one another, maybe over the campfire at night and chatting and talking, all very innocently. And then finally, Charles, on the final day, before they have to go back home, Charles says to Myrtle, I have 2 confessions to make. And she's, of course, listening very intently because they're now alone around the campfire. Everybody else has left. He says, confession number 1 is, I've fallen in love with you. There should be an awe here. Somebody's, oh, yeah, thank you. And now, you wonder what the second confession is. He said, I have a second confession to make. I'm engaged to a girl in Dixon. Oh, we're in trouble. That girl in Dixon, back here. And so I wondered what that scene would have been like. Of Charles R. Walgreen sitting around the campfire with Myrtle Norton sharing these confessions. So I went to ChatGPT. Here it created this moonlight scene. The bald Charles, I got to make him bald. Sitting with Myrtle and confessing these things to her. It really is fantastic. This took about 30 seconds, and it was free to get this done. This is amazing, people. Absolutely amazing. This is all available for free for anybody now to do that. So this was the story of how Charles R. Walgreen fell in love with Myrtle. But now we got this Dixon girl to contend with. He's engaged to a girl in Dixon. And he starts to tell some interesting details about this girl. First off, she's my sister's best friend. Ooh, this is going to be trouble. Not only that, she has already had several engagement parties. Oh, we're in trouble. You think that's bad? Here's the worst part. She was described as excitable. You know how women are. My God. They're my wife just groaned. So he's actually concerned she might do harm to herself back in Dixon. So, but he does the proper thing. He goes back to Dixon to break off the engagement in person, which somehow he got off and he's still alive to tell the story. But Myrtle Walgreen reflected on this whole thing about Charles and going back in person and breaking it off with her, not writing her a Dear John letter, you know, or a dear, we don't know what her name was, by the way. I tried to find this out, but I don't know who that was. But Myrtle said, I knew then that Charles was an honest man. Circumstances pinch honest men and women sometimes, and it's a temptation to bend to circumstances to get out of the pinch. But Charles did not do that. And exactly 1 year later, from that campfire meeting, the two were married in Chicago on August the 18th of 1902. And that's a famous love story of Charles and Myrtle Walgreen, as told by Myrtle herself. So this is 1902. They're married. And Charles is now, he was born in 73, so he's 29 years old, or actually 28, we can determine. And she's 22, so he's got 6 years on her. So let's advance up now a couple years. Let's get back to business. 1904, Charles opens the Dixon Walgreen drugstore. Now, not these Walgreens that you know of in our lifetime, but there was a Dixon Walgreen store that Charles actually owned. In 1904, there were two big events in Charles's life that took place in Dixon, Illinois. And they're both in the month of April, the month we're in right now. The first event is April 12th. Charles' father died. Yeah, so Charles had to come back for the funeral and all that. But Charles was already deep into business. He's got his own store working, and he's got a lot of things to do and a lot of things on his mind. So 4 days later, he opens his second drugstore, and that's the one in Dixon, Illinois. Yes, also on First Avenue, West First Street in Dixon. I found some photos that actually show this drugstore. This is looking west on First Street. This is going down Galena, down this way, going up Galena, south Galena, going west here. And you see this sign right here? Right up at the top it says Walgreen Davis Company. Walgreen Davis Drugstore in Dixon. Right there at 105 West 1st Street. Here's another photo I found of the store. You see that sign there? Look a little closer. Walgreen Davis Drugstore in downtown Dixon. Right next to where the bank is today. We know it today fondly as Salamandras. Right, Cora? Yes. Here. Now, they weren't selling tacos at the drugstore back then, but they do this today. And if you ever want to go in to where Charles R. Walgreen had his first store in Dixon, go into Salamandra's and she'll treat you right, won't you? Yes. His partner at the time was a guy named Ross Davis, who was a pharmacist in Dixon. They're in partnership with this store. It's located at 105 West 1st Street, right next to the bank. And it's next to the same store where Charles had started 13 years earlier when he first got involved in the drugstore business. To see a modern image, you see the bank here, there's Cora's place, there's Salamandra's, and that is also where Walgreens drugstore was at 105 West 1st Street. Isn't that kind of cool, Cora? Yeah. I actually have a photo of the inside, and I'll share that with you here in a minute. But back then, Charles was big into advertising, advertised in the Telegraph quite a bit. You can see all these Walgreen Davis ads in the Telegraph going back then. And here is a photo of Salamandra's 120 years ago. The Walgreen Davis store in 1904 looked like this. Now, I know you've got tile or a different kind of ceiling here, but I bet that ceiling is still there up above that. Do you know that that's true, Cora?
It's not there. We have our party room, which has that ceiling, but the 105 does not.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know. All right, well, that was the Walgreen Davis store back at the time. You might be interested to know the kinds of things they sold at a drugstore back then. Of course, cigars and paint and candies and soap and toothpicks. This is the one I like down here. Hudnuts toilet water and cold cream. Boy, I need some toilet water. That's what I need to do. Now, the toilet water was apparently some kind of a lotion that people would put on after they took a bath or something, and they called it toilet water. People didn't go into the toilet with a splash of water. Yeah, I feel great now, ready for the day. But they had bug killer, pocket knives, cut flowers. They sold streetcar tickets. Because the Dixon streetcar that went from Dixon to Sterling had just gone in May of 1904, and you could go into Walgreens drugstore and get tickets to go to Sterling on the streetcar. That's another story I've told in another presentation. The train tickets are also available, but there. Barnum and Bailey Circus came to town in 1904, I believe, and you can get tickets there at Walgreens. All this is evident in all the newspaper articles and ads that I read from 1904, 5, 6, and 7. I've also found this online, this image of Egyptian Luca Cream olive oil, bottled by Walgreen Davis Company, druggists of Dixon, Illinois. I don't know what Luca Cream is, but there it is. Charles Walgreen sold it. I found this photo. This is one of the photos that the folks at Walgreen sent to me of Charles R. Walgreen with the mortar and pestle that the pharmacists use to crunch up pills or whatever they do, and that's Charles R. Walgreen. It's probably not him at his Dixon store. He looks a little older here, but that is Charles R. Walgreen hard at work in a drugstore. But finally, in 1907, just only 3 years later, Walgreens sold his Dixon store. And as Myrtle said, occasionally in those early days, Charles would buy a store, get the business going well, and then sell it. And that's what he did. The only time that Charles Walgreen owned a store in Dixon was between 1904 and 1907. And that's when he sold the store here. Now, one thing that's really, really fascinating to me, on the back of the store, Cora, do you own that building?
Yes.
You do? Okay.
And we have the sign. It's still there. The letter's still.
You mean this sign? I found this in the Telegraph in 1939. If you look at the back of that, sort of like a commercial alley right behind, parallel to 1st Street, back in Commercial Alley, look up, let's see here. This is Dixon National Bank looking up there. The alley be down here along the ground. The right up here, there's a sign that says Walgreen Davis, what's it say? Wholesale and retail drugs. And if you look up there today, the sign is still there. You got to kind of look carefully, but it says, it's there. Trust me. You go there and you can see it with your naked eye. It's kind of hard in this room, but it says Walgreen Davis Wholesale Retail Drug Store right there. And I think it would be a cool project to have that somehow restored so that people can see that that was the place where Charles R. Walgreen. Do you like that idea, Coral?
We are actually that's our next project.
That's your next project? Okay, cool. Yes! I bet, judging by all the applause, there's people who'd be willing to donate to that project. I think that'd be really cool. So anyway, this is 1907, but he's buying up stores now, Charles R. Walgreen. He's left the Dixon store, but he's going elsewhere. From 1909 to 1929, I call it acquisition fever. He's buying up drugstores all over the place. By 1909, he had bought his second drugstore after he sold off the Dixon. He bought a second one. And then by 1916, he had 9 stores. All of them were in Chicago at that time. But advanced only 3 years after that, he now has 19 stores. All of those were in Chicago and no place else. By 1927, he was opening a new store every week. Every week. And by 1929, he's got 397 stores in 87 cities across the country. This guy is, this is the kind of business guy he is. He had developed a template for a great drugstore that would work and be successful and liked by customers. And he starts to plant this system everywhere around the country. Here's another one of the photos that the Walgreens folks sent to me of Charles R. Walgreen there on the left, behind the counter with somebody else selling drugs. This is a photo from 1920 that they sent me of the Walgreen fleet. You look at these old trucks from 1920, it says Walgreen drugs there. They all say Walgreens on them somewhere. It says Walgreens. And it says Walgreens. If you get close to this, you see all of them say Walgreens on it. He's got a fleet of trucks taking his stuff to all the stores wherever. This is in the 1920s. He's being very, very successful. This is not, by the way, this presentation is not about Walgreen drugstore history, only as it affects our guy, Charles Walgreen. Now, in 1927, another crisis event takes place in Charles's life. His mother dies. And where is his mom living? Of course, in Dixon, Illinois. The funeral was here in Dixon. Charles comes back for the funeral June 6th of 1927. Now this is an article in the newspaper, talks about funeral for Mrs. Ellen Walgreen, held back here in Dixon. It was held at the home of F.X. Newcomer. How many of you remember the name F.X. Newcomer? Yeah, half of you. Big name in Dixon. F.X. Newcomer's wife was Esther, who was Charles Walgreen's sister. There's a connection between F.X. Newcomer and Charles Walgreen. They're brothers-in-law. And I didn't realize that. But the funeral was held at the F.X. Newcomer house, which still stands to this day at 224 East 3rd Street, just about a half a block away from where Preston Schilling Funeral Home is to this day. But Charles Walgreen would have come back here, and he would have buried his mom out at Oakwood Cemetery, which is where his father was also buried, and all his sisters as well. That's 1927. Now, advance now 2 years up to 1929. Another significant event in the life of Charles R. Walgreen in Dixon takes place. He buys Hazelwood. You should know what Hazelwood is. We call it the Walgreen Estates out there north of town, just close to Lowell Park. You take Brinton Avenue all the way out. If you take it all the way out, you'll find a gate. You can't get through there anymore, but back there is the Walgreen Estate. For years and years, Charles had said to Myrtle, when we get $20,000 in the bank, we're going to get a place in the country. And he also said he had his eye on a particular farm on the Rock River. and we're talking about Hazelwood. And sure enough, the exchange takes place. Charles buys Hazelwood, and it makes front page news on the Dixon Telegraph. Hazelwood is sold to Charles R. Walgreen. This place was a highly revered location for Dixon ever since the 1830s in Father John Dixon's day. People had lived out there all that time. Abraham Lincoln had slept out there. Famous people had been out there for 100 years. And Hazelwood now gets bought by Charles R. Walgreen. They had a family meeting after they visited a couple places to where they wanted to buy the farm. And as Myrtle says, we all voted to buy this farm, Hazelwood, and no other farm. Isn't that interesting? All the places, this guy's got all the money in the world. Where does he go? Hazelwood in Dixon, Illinois. Here's a map of where that would look. You see the river going through Dixon. Hazelwood is up here. It's about 150 acres, 144 acres, I think, to be exact, of what they had. It's right next to Lowell Park up here, right along the river that winds down through Dixon to the bridge. They did a lot of work fixing up Hazelwood, building new buildings, fixing the pond out there. They put in a pool. And Myrtle Walgreen is a gardener extraordinaire. She loves gardening. She loves fixing up the landscape. And the Telegraph said when Charles Walgreen bought the property, he said, "It is unquestionably the most beautiful spot in the Rock River Valley and in all the Middle West." But that's what they said in 1929 when Charles R. Walgreen bought the place. There's another photo that Walgreen sent me. This is a photo of Charles R. Walgreen in his pool out there at Hazelwood. And he's got his dog here, the dog Boston Terrier. The dog's name was Podoo. He ended up calling, Walgreens made golf balls, and they called them Podoo golf balls. They also had some lotion, they called it Podoo lotion, but it's named after the dog. So go figure. But that photo right here in Dixon is where that was taken. So that's another key connection between Dixon and Walgreen. 1928 now. Now, Dixon's airport gets connected to Walgreen, or maybe vice versa. Because by 1828, Charles has got all these drugstores all over the country, and he's got to visit them. Location is very important to him, so he's got to go there and check out the location before he buys it. And so getting on an airplane becomes crucial to getting to all these locations. And in 1928, airplanes are relatively new. There's not a lot of them. When one would go over the top of the city, everybody would look up to go look at the airplane. And so what Walgreen did in 1928, he donated a big sign for the airport, which was then called the Joseph Crawford Airport in Dixon. Joseph Crawford had a whole bunch of farms all the way down Franklin Grove Road called the Crawford Farms. If you've heard of this, right? Raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Yes. So that was called the Joseph Crawford Airport at that time. And he donated this large sign, and it was talked about in the paper, Walgreen donates marker for Dixon Airport. Now, it's not a sign to be along the road. It's a sign to be seen from the sky. And here is a 1939 aerial photo that I found of that airport property as it stood back then. Zooming in a little bit, you get this big circle, and there's 5 letters there that it's out of focus, but I think it said Dixon. That way, people who are in airplanes flying over, they could look down and see this big thing, and they knew that there's an airport there. And Charles R. Walgreen had paid for the whole thing to happen. So he donated that sign in 28. In 1930, he brought his good buddies, Merrill Miggs and Jimmy Doolittle, to Dixon for the dedication of the revived Dixon Municipal Airport. Now, you recognize those names? You've heard of Miggs Field in Chicago? Yeah, he's a good buddy with Charles Walgreen. Jimmy Doolittle of Doolittle's Raid at the beginning of World War II. Yeah, he's also a big friend with Charles R. Walgreen. Here's photos of these two guys from back then. They actually came to Dixon on a regular basis to come see Charles R. Walgreen and stay out at Hazelwood, landing at the Dixon Airport. Where am I putting? Dixon Airport out there. And there was a big Banquet held in Dixon in 1934. Honor Dixon benefactors at dinner tonight. You see Charles R. Walgreen here on the right. That's Walter Page on the left. That's another story I'd love to tell you about the Pages. But this was a big deal. Dixon's very much aware of all that Charles R. Walgreen is doing for the city. Owning Hazelwood out there was a big deal enough because it had started to get into disrepair, and they made it magnificent out there. And as the Dixon Evening Telegraph said about Charles R. Walgreen, it was his Dixon roots that enabled him to start out with a good head on his shoulders, right? That's the secret to his success, was growing up in Dixon, learning those small town values of treating people right. In 1940, this is, by the way, advancing up to look at other connections with this airport business. Richard Byrd, Admiral Richard Byrd, who flew over the South Coast, South Pole, I can't remember his distinction, but on one of his journeys in 1940, he named a 1,000-mile coastline of Antarctica the Walgreen Coast. And that name sticks to this day today, all named after Charles R. Walgreen of Dixon, Illinois, because Byrd had been here to Dixon many times. And to advance up just a little bit further to 1964, Walgreen Field was finally dedicated in 1964. Not earlier, not later, but that's when it all happened. Charles R. Walgreen is gone by that time, but Merrill Miggs is up there at the podium. He'd come back to Dixon in 64 to dedicate the airport in the memory of Charles R. Walgreen. This is a full-page ad that appeared in the Telegraph in July of 64 when Walgreen Field was dedicated. And there is a bronze historical marker out there at the airport, right here on the side. It's got Walgreen's photo on it, plus a description of his involvement in the airport, and of course it says Walgreen Field up there on the main hangar at the Dixon Airport, better known as Charles R. Walgreen Field. But that's not the only way that the Walgreens have connections with Dixon. We've talked about Hazelwood, we've talked about the airport, but there are other things that they did here that need to be mentioned. You all know the Lincoln statue? Well, it was built in 1930, and who served on the committee to get this thing built but Charles R. Walgreen? And if you go back behind the statue to this day, you'll see a plaque that lists all the people who were on the committee to get that thing built in 1930, and Charles R. Walgreen is one of them. 1930 was a big year for Dixon because it was our centennial. As Jennifer mentioned earlier, Dixon was founded in 1830, so in 1930 was a big thing going on, and having the statue built, as well as the Peoria Avenue Bridge built in that year, was a way of commemorating the Dixon's centennial in that year, and Charles R. Walgreen is involved with that. In 1933, with the Great Depression had hit, Dixon National Bank and all banks were threatened to go under. There was over 9,000 banks that failed in 1929 after the collapse of the stock market. But Charles R. Walgreen had put a whole bunch of money into the bank to keep it solvent in 1933. He also saved the Dixon Country Club, which was in danger of going under back in the 1930s. And I think he bought like 100 different memberships to help, even though he probably gave them to somebody, but that's a way to get money into the system to help save the country club. In 1935, he bought a yacht, and what's he name it? The Dixonia. Charles R. Walgreen buys a yacht and he names it after Dixon. Who knew? And this yacht still exists to this day. It actually had a big role in World War II. Read my chapter in the book about this, and you can read more about that. When he finally died in 1939, he set up some charitable funds for various organizations in Dixon to fund them $1,500 per year to the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, and 6 different churches in town. I don't know when that $1,500 per year ran out, but that was providing $1,500 a year in 1939 is a chunk of dough. So all that was being done for Dixon, and people had all this feeling of of appreciation for what Charles R. Walgreen did for Dixon, because he loved this place. And there's another interesting little tidbit of information. In 1943, Charles R. Walgreen's daughter, Ruth, Diane, you know this story, the daughter Ruth Walgreen is very much involved in the artistry world, and she goes to the guy named Ossip Zadkin, who is becoming a very famous sculptor at that time, and she likes the sculpture that he has done. This is called The Poet. And she buys this from Zadkin himself in 1943, and she donates it to the school system in Dixon. I think for probably the art department at the high school. Now, the story is not over there, because in 2012, 70 years later, the Ossip Zadkin Research Center in Belgium finds out that Dixon has in its possession an original work of Ossip Zadkin. And they contact the school district and say, we understand you've got our sculpture, is that right? And we said, yeah, it's in the basement. Yeah, what do you want? I mean, it looks like that. It's like about 13 inches tall, but it's Ossip Zadkin original. And they said, well, listen, are you guys willing to part with that? And we said, well, I don't know, we use it pretty frequently. And they said, we'll give you $70,000. And the school board says, okay. So for $70,000, they got the Zadkin sculpture back. It's now, I believe, in Paris. And Zadkin has become quite famous around the world. They're harvesting all the stuff that he had done for his lifetime. And anyway, it was here in Dixon for what, 70 years. Pretty amazing. Now, that's not the only sculpture that came to Dixon through the Walgreens. There's also a Lincoln sculpture that came here in 1947. How many are familiar with this sculpture? Yes, my hand's going up now. This now is at Jefferson School. It was at Lincoln School for a long time. The Lincoln School was built in 1937, and I think it's either Ruth Walgreen or maybe it was Myrtle herself who had this sculpture commissioned by a guy to have a sculpture of Abraham Lincoln as a fourth grader, I think it is, a 10-year-old or something, studying a book. And they then donated it to Dixon, and this was at Lincoln School for years and years and years. Now, it's a little bit embarrassing if you look really closely at this thing. It's anatomically correct. It's almost scary, but it's, you'll have to look at it and you'll see what I mean. But it's about 4 feet tall, or it lays down there. It's now at Jefferson School, and they donated that to Dixon. In 1958, the First Methodist church was building a chapel downstairs, and the Walgreens paid for the whole thing. And there on the wall it says the chapel in memory of Charles and Ellen Walgreen, which is Charles's parents. So they donated the money for the parents who went there quite frequently back when they were alive. That was in 1958. You can still see this plaque even to this day right outside the chapel at the First Methodist Church. And then in 2004, some money also came, a large fund that came from the Walgreens, not Myrtle or Charles, they're gone by 2004, but to help fund the Northwest Illinois Territory Center. And this elevator that was installed there to make it accessible to everybody was paid for by Walgreens, and plus a bunch of other money that was also involved. So the Walgreens continuing to invest in Dixon for a long period of time. These kinds of things should not be forgotten if you're going to talk about Charles R. Walgreen and Dixon. But what kind of a man is this guy? You've probably already got some kind of an idea. He's kind of a down-home guy. And his personality is perhaps best revealed in an interesting story that took place in 1935. In 1935, Charles is 62 years old, living in Chicago, running hundreds of stores around the country. But in 1935, The Red Scare was very common in America. The clash with communism. People are fearing that commies are infiltrating the country and taking over. And Ronald Reagan got involved in this in the 1940s when he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild, fighting communism as it was creeping into America. Well, how does this affect Charles R. Walgreen? Well, in 1935, Charles Walgreen was having breakfast with his niece, Lucille Norton, actually a niece of Myrtle's, at their place I think it's on the lakefront in Chicago. And she is being funded by Charles R. Walgreen in her first year at the University of Chicago. She's a freshman. And University of Chicago, very prestigious school, by the way. Then it still is to this day. And Charles is interested, well, what are you learning at school these days? She was taking a social studies class, and he wanted to see the reading list of the books that she had to read. And he is alarmed at the stuff that they're having her read, and he sees that there's a lot of communist influence in all these books that she has for required reading at the University of Chicago. So I wonder what this was like, what that breakfast meeting was like, of Charles R. Walgreen with his 18-year-old niece. And so I had ChatGPT, or maybe I had Google Gemini create this one. And here he is reading the reading list and being shocked at what she is reading, all these books that seem to have some communist influence in them. But Charles was really, really upset. It really bothered him, to the point that he wrote a letter to the president of the University of Chicago, and the letter wrote, with regret, I am having my niece, Miss Lucille Norton, discontinue her studies at the University of Chicago. I am unwilling to have her absorb the communistic influences to which she is so insidiously exposed. Whoa. Okay. But that began a conversation between the president of the University of Chicago and Charles R. Walgreen. They started to get together. And the president of the University of Chicago at that time was a guy named Robert M. Hutchins, a well-known guy. And they start to meet several times. Hutchins is saying, no, I think, Charles, you've got it all wrong. We're just simply telling people about these different political systems that are available on the planet. We're not promoting anything in particular. We're just giving kids an education, not promoting anything. And so they meet several times, and they actually start to become very good friends. Now remember, this took place in 1935. Well, it kind of comes to a head in 1937 when Charles R. Walgreen establishes the Walgreen Foundation of $500,000 for the study of American institutions at the University of Chicago. This is the guy who yanked his niece out of school because of the communistic influence to which she was so insidiously exposed. But now he's pouring big bucks, and that's $12 million in our money today, that Charles R. Walgreen did for the University of Chicago. I don't know if this is exactly an admission of guilt, or maybe it's a sign that he was pleased that the University of Chicago had adapted some things, because this conflict between Walgreen and Hutchins at the University of Chicago made national news. The Illinois State Senate got involved in doing investigations of the University of Chicago because of this event. But as a result, and it was in Time magazine wrote an article about this whole thing back then when it was going on. So it was a big deal. When Charles R. Walgreen sticks his nose into something, is really upset, you're going to find out about it. Usually he's a very quiet guy, stays out of the public eye, but this thing was different. And it ends up with him giving $500,000 to the university. By the way, this particular foundation does not exist today, but it has been, I think, moved over into a funded professorship at the university, the Charles R. Walgreen Professorship at the University of Chicago. Still exists to this day. So what are some of Walgreen's small-town values? I think his concern about communism probably arose from his deep patriotic feelings growing up in Dixon, his deep patriotic feelings fighting in the Spanish-American War, being familiar with all those stuff. But what were some things that he said? What are some things that he stood for in his career? First off, it's interesting that he opposed having an office in the prestigious Chicago Loop. Now, anybody who had a big business back then, you get your office in the Loop, then you're really somebody. Walgreen says, forget that. I'm not into that. This is where small town values are taken over. He's not out to show off to anybody. He's just going to be himself. He also said, worry never helped anything. Another statement. Too many people push, he said. Things come if you wait. And growing up on a farm, a little slower pace out here, you can appreciate where that particular statement came from. He also said a good bricklayer is as successful as an opera star. Is valuing anybody in the food chain, or the value that they bring to any particular job. A bricklayer is as good as an opera star. There's no reason to be valuing one person. Some executive is more higher than anybody else. This, I think, is small town values expressed well by Charles R. Walgreen. He also said, take care of your customers. Treat them like guests in your own home. He had some very productive and successful business philosophies. He gave store managers a sense of ownership and independence. He required his stores to be profitable. Duh, but it seems like that's not always done today. But he required it. It's a good way to have a successful business. He also carefully selected store locations wherever they were placed around the country or around the world. And he insisted on superior customer service, clean stores with attractive displays. He knew the power of advertising wherever he went. He learned that here in Dixon with all those ads. He had the Dixon paper in 1904, but he knew the power wherever he went around the country. He actually bought the very first full-page newspaper ad that ever appeared in the Chicago Tribune. Did you catch that? In 1920, the first full-page ad bought by Walgreens. He also took out full-page ads in the Saturday Evening Post in 1928. He's also the very first drugstore to advertise on radio in 1931. Charles R. Walgreen knew the power of advertising. And this is just when radio's just getting going back in 1931. But all good things must come to an end. And Charles R. Walgreen died in 1939. The news hit the Dixon Telegraph. It's covered on the front page. Charles R. Walgreen dies in the night. Death comes to famous founder of drug company at his home in Chicago. Rose from clerkship to president of biggest company of its kind in the nation. It was huge news, not only for Dixon, but for around the country. The news of Charles R. Walgreen's death published everywhere. And if you want to know what his company was like in 1939, well, he had, of course, his first drugstore was in 1901. By 1919, he had 19 stores. By 29, he had 397 stores. By 1939, when he died, he had 470 stores in 39 states, and it was decidedly the largest drugstore chain in the world. All built by this kid from Dixon who went off to Chicago in 1892. So he's got a funeral to have, right? This big guy, well-known Charles R. Walgreen, going to have a funeral? Where's the funeral going to be held? Well, it's not in Chicago, even though he'd been living there for 40 years. And it was not going to be a public funeral. It was just going to be friends and family. It tells you something about Charles Walgreen. Where was the funeral? Hazelwood, Dixon, Illinois. And who delivered the eulogy? Get this. Robert M. Hutchins. Yeah, that guy that they had the big battle with back in 35. Robert M. Hutchins, president of the University of Chicago, comes out to Hazelwood and he delivers the eulogy out there before a small crowd of friends and family. Here's some things that he said, reported in the Telegraph. Mr. Walgreen was the best friend I had. Think about that for a minute. Two people seemingly at opposite ends of the political spectrum, battling with one another publicly, and yet the two of them were of such character that they could develop a strong friendship, and one deliver the eulogy for another and call the other the best friend he ever had. He said there was no bunk about Mr. Walgreen. He was always himself, simple, honest, and direct. He also said that Charles R. Walgreen never formed acquaintances because of something he could get out of them. This was Charles R. Walgreen. And then he closed his eulogy saying, "We shall not look upon his like again." Charles R. Walgreen, funeral, Hazelwood and Dixon. Where was he buried? Right. Oakwood Cemetery in Dixon, Illinois. Not in Chicago at some fancy cemetery. Right here, where his mom and dad were buried, his sisters and brothers are buried. But he had a whole new plot built for his Walgreen family at the back end of Oakwood Cemetery. And here's a photo of where it is. And his wife, Myrtle, described this area as a beautiful section of woodland where trees seemed to form the walls of a cathedral built by nature. And there we left his body. The Telegraph said, upon the occasion of his funeral, he was a simple, kindly, modest man who here received his education and the training that was to determine the course of his illustrious career and his vast business empire. And there Charles R. Walgreen was laid to rest December the 11th of 1939. Now our story could be over there, but there's another important angle that must not be forgotten. And that is the story of Myrtle Walgreen and Dixon, because this is huge. You got to remember, Myrtle was only 23 years old when they married. I think I said 22, but she was 22 when they met, 23 when they got married. She was 61 when Charles died in 1939. She would live another 32 years. And all that time, Myrtle loved Hazelwood, and Dixon loved Myrtle. And she starts to devote a lot of time out here and gardening and fixing up the property and making it just wonderful. In 1941, 2 years after her husband has died, Dixon has an opportunity to have what was called Luella Parsons Day and bring Luella Parsons, the famous Hollywood gossip columnist, to Dixon, along with Ronald Reagan, and have big to-dos in Dixon. They brought a whole bunch of Hollywood celebrities to Dixon. And where did they stay? Hazelwood. Myrtle hosted. She just absolutely loved it. You've probably seen this picture before. There's Ronald Reagan right there, and Rutherford. There's Luella Parsons. She's got her arm around Myrtle R. Walgreen. This photo taken out at the Walgreen estate at Hazelwood. Myrtle later described that event as one of the gayest events in Hollywood's history. It's not just those guys who were here. Bob Hope came here for that same event. And you know where this photo was taken? Anybody want to guess? Shout it out. Loveland building. You're in it. They were right here as well. The building had just been built 1 year earlier in 1940, and now all the celebrities come out here. Where are you going to go? What a great place this is. Isn't this cool? They had a big banquet in here. People in the community could come in. This photo was taken in one of those rooms off to the side. I wondered about this photo over here on the side. If you can find this photo of these plants, it's hanging somewhere around here. It might be up in the attic, but this is where they were. There's Bob Hope with Luella Parsons. This is Myrtle Walgreen here. There is Jerry Colonna back there, and Rutherford, these Hollywood celebrities and comedians. All of them, as Myrtle said, stayed at Hazelwood for their time here. I got several photos from the Walgreen Company. This is one of them, Ronald Reagan on a horse with Myrtle Walgreen at that 1941 event out at Hazelwood. Pretty cool. And she had several things to say about Ronald Reagan in her book. Now, her book is written in 1963. 63. This is before Reagan gets involved in politics. This is before he ran for governor of California. And she loved Ronald, and Ronald loved Myrtle. She said all week long during 1941, Ronald's forthright candor won over everyone, and we became real friends. She says in her book, Ronald had often caddied for Charles when he was a boy in Dixon. He came to one of the picnics we gave for the caddies each year, and I brought him his plate of food while he lay in the hammock. That was his idea of being king. Myrtle loved Ronald Reagan, and Ronald Reagan loved being here as well in 1941. He came back in 1950 for Indian summer days, and where does he go? Out to Hazelwood. To go see who? Well, there's Myrtle Walgreen right there, Ronald Reagan, and Ronald's mother, Nell Reagan, out at Hazelwood in 1950. I've been able to count and pinpoint and verify 4 different times when Reagan stayed out at Hazelwood. So it's a number of times. Like this one, in 1978, long after Charles and Myrtle are gone, he stayed out at Hazelwood then and sent this letter to Charles Jr., the son of Charles and Myrtle, and thanked him for giving him such nice accommodations out at Hazelwood in 1978. But Myrtle Walgreen opened up Hazelwood to the community. Every year, she sponsored the annual garden walk at Hazelwood. This went on for 20 years, from 1948 to 1968, and it attracted thousands of people every year. For example, the 1965 garden walk, the newspaper says that it attracted over 5,000 visitors, coming from 230 Illinois cities, 12 other states, 7 countries, all coming where? To Dixon, to Hazelwood, to go see Myrtle Walgreen's garden walk. As the Telegraph once said, no other single event brings so many visitors to Dixon. They wrote that in 1965, just before Dixon invented the Petunia Festival. That sort of took over after that. But by 1965, folks, Myrtle Walgreen's deep into her 80s, and she's starting to get feeble and unable to deal with it. I was able to get a couple more photos. A friend of mine, Craig Carpenter in Oregon, came in 1962 to the garden walk, and he shared this photo from his color slides. You can see the river from Hazelwood, gorgeous view of the Rock River, and that's a photo that he took on that particular visit. But as Myrtle gets older and older, she got a golf cart that says Hazelwood right on it down here. But that's Myrtle on her golf cart out at Hazelwood, because she really needs help getting around. She's deep into her 80s and starting to be too old to be the hostess with the mostest, as she was for so many years. But through her years, older years, she became an author. She wrote her book called Never a Dull Day. How many of you have Never a Dull Day? Anybody? There's about 3 or 4 hands going up there. It's a cool book. You go and read a lot of the stuff we've read about, talked about today. It's all there in the book. She became an author. She was a photographer. She was a pilot and a benefactor of many different causes. Somebody told me earlier today, if you go to the Chapel in the Sky at the Methodist Church in Chicago, she donated a bunch of stuff for that. Who stepped up? Yes, Vicky. If you go there, you can see the stuff that the Walgreens donated to the Chapel in the Sky in downtown Chicago. But when she died in 1971, the Telegraph called her Dixon's best-known citizen. I think she's 91 at that time. And of course, they have a funeral for the great Myrtle Walgreen. But where is the funeral? You're right. It's at Hazelwood. Where is she buried? You guessed. She's at Oakwood Cemetery. And that's where her body was finally laid to rest, out there next to her husband, Charles R. Walgreen, Myrtle R. Walgreen, buried August the 20th of 1971. You might wonder, the Walgreens company today, how big are they today? They've got over 12,000 stores worldwide. They've got over 8,000 pharmacies in the U.S. alone. Over 300,000 employees globally. And it was all started by a boy from Dixon. Got his finger cut off here. But loved playing out at Lowell Park, going up and down the river. Who got his start in the pharmacy business right here in Dixon. Was finally even buried out at Dixon after donating the airport to so many different things. The Walgreens never forgot Dixon. And it's my hope that Dixon never forgets the Walgreens. Thanks for listening, guys. You may have questions. This is a lot of stuff, and some of you may need to go. I understand this went longer than I thought. But questions you have? There's a lot of things. Yes, go ahead. Rudolph. Pretty sure that's right, Rudolph. How did Hazelwood get its name? Hazelwood had its name in 1836, a long time before Charles got there. It was Alexander Charters was the first guy who owned that property way back then. I think he called it Hazelwood because it reminded him of a place out east. I forget the story there, but that's where the name came from. Yes. Yes. It had already been through like 4 different owners before the Walgreens got it in 1929. Other questions? Yes. Ed. Yeah, good question. How many kids did Charles and Myrtle have? They had 3. First one died in his first year. And he's buried at Oakwood Cemetery, right? It had to be a tragic event. It was 1904 when that happened, about the same year when he started his store here. And then he had 2 other kids, Charles Jr. and his daughter Ruth. And Charles Jr. ended up taking over the company and then passed it on to Charles III, who was known as Corky for a long time, was his nickname. But none of the families involved in the company anymore. There's quite a history of all that as well. Other questions? Yes? Have I had the opportunity to present this to Walgreens? I haven't. I'm really scared about doing that. Yeah, I think they would. There was actually a Walgreens relative who I saw on Facebook a year ago when she saw that I was going to present this stuff, and she wanted to come, and I told her I was coming out today, and she couldn't be here today, but she wanted to come from Chicago out here to see it. Are we still recording, Lucas? Oh, okay, I'll be careful. I've heard this from many different sources. There's been kind of a rift in the family, and I don't know why or who's involved, but there's some tensions. Anytime you've got billions of dollars involved, things can get a little sensitive at times. So, and I don't know who's doing what, but it is kind of a delicate subject. And Hazelwood is still owned by the Walgreen family. There's some technical details that need to be sorted out there. For a while, they had donated the land to the University of Illinois. You remember this is back in the 90s, and the University of Illinois had it for a while, but then the family bought it back 20 years ago or something, and it's now in the hands of a great-grandson of Charles R. Walgreen, who lives in Winnetka. And I'd love to feel real nice to him. Because wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great if they would open up the Hazelwood like once a year? Have people come on the property and take a garden walk or whatever it is. My wife Nancy will take care of the garden for free. Whatever you got to do. Yeah. But that would be really cool. I think that property is a real treasure for this community. Has been for almost 200 years now, and it'd be great to see that happen. Another thing that, I'm going to toss out another idea, just maybe this will happen because I suggested it. I'd like to see the Park District take it. And then the Park District begin to manage it and run it, and then maybe offer tours on a regular basis, and it become an income-producing thing, where people could come from miles around just to go visit the historic Hazelwood, where Abraham Lincoln slept. There's tunnels out there. There's different buildings. It's really fascinating. How many of you have been out there? Some remember? Yeah, see, hands are going up. And you have favorite memories of going out there. Pretty cool place. And yet we can't get in out there now. And it's private, I understand. Yeah, Vicki.
So it used to be like in the 80s that family members came out, like especially like Thanksgiving weekend. I used to work with a lady that helped out and worked at Walgreen. Do any family members ever come out to stay for like a weekend?
Do any of the family members come out? I think so, but I don't know for sure. They have a full-time caretaker who lives out there. His name is Lee Rogers. He's got a family. They take care of it, and they make sure nobody gets in. That's their job. That's their job. And but they're keeping it up to make sure it doesn't fall into disrepair. And so I would suspect that the guy from Winnetka, his name is Casey Pratt. His mother was a Walgreen, and she married a Pratt. So I don't want any bad feelings about anybody here. So we want to keep in good graces with the Walgreens. Yes.
Just a comment, way back in the presentation.
2 hours ago? Yeah.
No, it's been great.
Okay, thank you.
He said, I quit.
Yes.
Because he didn't shovel the walk.
Yeah.
He gave up. That was probably a turning point in his life.
I think he knew he was going to be fired, so he wanted to quit before he got fired. Yeah.
Young man, I quit. I wonder how many times he thought about that as a motivation to continue to be the man he turned out to be.
I look back at my own life, and the times when something good really happened started with me being really upset. And sometimes that's probably the smartest decision he ever made. As my wife always tells me, I got fired once. And she said, best thing that ever happened to you. And it does. It motivates you.
That's why I brought that up.
Yep, that's it. Yes.
Reading more about the Revolutionary War now, and some of George Washington's best decisions were to retreat in the night when he said he could not win the fight.
Sometimes you move forward by moving backward. Yes. 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. 3 steps, whatever. Yeah. Sometimes you got to go back in order to go forward. As my son was in the Army, and his major told him, look, sometimes you got to go slow in order to go fast. Other comments? Questions? One more idea will float out there. We have a statue for Ronald Reagan. Great. It's outstanding. I'm so glad Larry got involved in getting that done. It's really, really cool. We have a Lincoln statue. I think that Charles R. Walgreen is important enough and big enough and known enough around the world that Dixon would do well to have a statue for Charles R. Walgreen. What do you think? If you clap, we're going to take up a collection. And I'd be willing to donate that to that as well. But I can see maybe down there on the riverfront someplace a statue of Charles R. Walgreen. Dixon's tourism has so many things going for it, and a statue of Charles R. Walgreen seems appropriate. And maybe if we're really nice with the Walgreen family, they'll donate some money as well. Guys, if you want to talk some more, come on up to me. Thank you again for coming for Congress.